Starting. Okay, so it's recording now. Okay, so what we're going to look at today is we're going to look at how to build dataset PCF controls. So we have looked at field type PCF controls. Today we're going to look at dataset. Now with dataset, as you remember from our first session when we were doing the initial overview, the dataset is nothing but you can change the view. So this entire view is also a dataset. So you can change the look and feel of this particular view, or you can also change the look and feel of the subgrid that are on the form. So my system today is pretty slow again. There's a lot of bandwidth been consumed nowadays. Let's see, try again. Okay, so there you go. So come on. Okay, so here is another subgrid. So this subgrid is what you see here. This is the out of the box subgrid, but we have changed that out of the box subgrid to look something different. So here is what is the custom subgrid. It looks something similar because I wanted to keep the look and feel similar to what CRM has, but give some additional capability to users like this hover details card over here. So this is a custom control for dataset. So what we're going to do today is, so let me run my code and dataset. So today we are gonna, I'm gonna show you the control that we are gonna try to build, and then we can start with the control itself. Okay, it's still running. Let me show you what's going on. So it's validating control. It's pretty slow for some reason. Okay, so now it's starting the control harness, which you can see here, and it will also give you the HTTPS link. Okay, so here is the dataset control. The thing you see here is undefined. Why the reason why it's showing it is because the way we have coded. I've coded the control, and as you remember from our field type control, field type was having properties shown up here, and then it was having the output data inputs and data outputs, right? But in the dataset type of control, you also get the data inputs as property, but you also get this data set over here. So you can choose a data set. So data set could be a CSV file or an Excel file. So I have the CSV file created already. So I'm going to select that, and then I'm going to say, OK, my name column is a single line text. My session is single line text. And then this type attribute is going to be my name column that is going to get displayed. And then I hit apply, and you can see that the data from my data set is getting shown. Now, the thing what we are going to do here is we are capturing a property, and property means nothing but the name of the column. OK, so type attribute is nothing but name of the column. So in this case, I gave name, but if I give session, then it's going to show me the session data. OK, so that's what we are going to do today. So depending on, we will have multiple columns, and depending on the name of the column that you provide over here, the data would be shown just from one column. I want to keep it very simple.
Perfect. Can I ask one thing?
Yeah.
Yeah. Like when we attach a CSV file, it will automatically pick the column heading like it the dataset control picks from the view itself. The same manner it will pick.
Yes. Yes.
Only CSV or any other formats we can attach?
I think so. It's only CSV. I don't know. Yeah, it's only CSV for now.
Okay. Fine.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Jay, you had any? You had question?
No, I think it kind of answers the question. So my question was actually regarding if the X. So that the CSV file, obviously it can't be the one which we export from CRM, right? It's not the template file.
No, it's not the template file. It's
Okay,
the
perfect.
actual
It could.
CSV file. I can show it to
It's just
you.
the like anything that you create within multiple columns. That's it, right?
Right, right, right.
Okay, perfect. No problem.
Yes, yeah. A regular CSV file with
Yeah, perfect.
multiple columns. Okay.
Mhm.
Okay, so this is what we're gonna build today. So let me just close out of this. I don't want to use this anymore. And let's start building. So let me stop this. And let's start building a control. So to build a control, we'll have to go to our PCF custom control builder as we decided, and then give the name. So this one would be Maverick. Okay, and then the control name would be data set training. And here, last time we selected field, this time we'll select data set. Okay, and when you select that, hit create. It would go and create the project for you. And I already have the folder structure over here. So let me just bring that folder structure over here. So it's running the pack command, and it's so npm is not there yet. It's still running the npm command. So let it run, and once it finishes the npm command, then we will see node modules loaded over here. And once it loads, then I can go ahead and then show you the internal structure, because the internal structure of dataset is little different than how it is for the field type. Okay, so it's still running. While it's running, anyone have any questions? Okay, that's good news. Either everyone understood everything or nothing.
I do have something, but maybe that's different actually. Yeah, I wanted to ask about the validations and the control actually.
Okay, yeah, we can let's hold off on that.
No problem. Because I'm just started building something. I'm like, okay, how would I do that validation that actually prevents saving from the CRM form?
Oh, you're doing the validation inside the
PCF.
control. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I see. I see. Okay.
Danish,
So
another thing,
mm,
Xbuild it. Yeah, Xbuild, right?
yeah, it is. But yeah, if it's gonna be short, then go ahead, please.
No, it may take some time, so we can.
Okay.
Nothing about it, we can discuss later. Fine.
All right, cool. All right, so now we have created a project. Now let's go and open it in Visual Studio Code. And first, let's go and look at the control manifest file. Now, the main difference between the dataset and the field type control is we get the dataset as the property as one of the tag, whereas in field type control we don't get dataset. Okay, and then you don't see property in here. Property is something that is optional in dataset, but in field type you have to define one property to work in the model driven app, right? So in field type, property is required. In dataset tag is required. Okay, that's the major change. The other one is in the manifest file, there's no output. Okay, there's only input. So dataset is only sending the data to the control. There's no output return. You can have an output only if you include a property. So property in here is something that is optional. So you can add here property name, so test, and then display display name. Now what you could do is you can actually go back to so you can actually copy it from here as well. So this should all be same. Everything should be same from here, except so you can copy it from here as a property, but this doesn't have field. If you're doing anything outside of dataset tag, so this is a dataset tag, right? So anything outside the dataset tag is called property. If your control is specific to a dataset tag, so this property set is inside the dataset tag, what that means is it would take the property of the column. I'll show you when we configure this particular property set, when we configure the control in the next session. So I will show you how that data set differs. This property is something that is outside, and this property can be bound or can be input. If it is bound, then it comes as part of your output. This particular property set, which is inner of the data set, it is part of the data set all the time. Okay. So if you want to get the data from the property set, you have to go through the data set attributes. I'll also show you how it differs in the code. So I'm going to keep this for now, just for our purposes or demo purposes.
So just excuse me, just one question.
Mm-hmm.
So for the dataset PCF type, I can also add like in my control, I will have like a grid, for example, and also I can edit some info inside, not only related to the grid, like some info related to the main record. The property you add, that will be related. I can bound it. For example, I'm bounding this.
Yes.
The dataset is for the contact entity, but I'm placing it inside the account form. So the field will be for the account, but the dataset will be for the contact. That can be done.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
Oh, good.
Yeah. So I'm going to say my data
Sorry,
set.
Dinesh, can I ask you a question?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, so let's suppose if you were like you're on the account form and you have a contact grid, right? And you have a data set of obviously account. Okay, you have a data set of the contact, right? And now those that property field that you have mentioned as a bound, right? If I have any field or any lookup or any such field which can actually change the data set of the grid, I can use this property field on the form, right?
So when you say lookup, a lookup cannot be specified as the type.
Or maybe
Data type.
any text. So let's suppose I would have some field which actually kind of, let's suppose some I have an opportunity subgrid, let's suppose, and I have a estimated revenue. I just want to show the revenue which is based on like certain number, let's suppose. So that property which you just mentioned outside the data set, which is not a property set, just a property itself because it's a bound. So is my understanding correct that if I actually have that property on the form, and if I would just put some data into that, that can be used as a filter or something to the data set itself?
It could, yes. So think of this property as a property on the form, right?
Mm-hmm.
But this property is the property on the data set itself. So you're saying that this is a required column on my data set. If this column doesn't exist, or if user is not able to map this column, then they won't be able to configure this control, because my control is dependent on this particular property on that data set. So let's
Okay,
take an
perfect.
example, accounts and contacts, right? You have a contact grid on account, and my control is actually doing email validation as well. And email address is a required property on my dataset on the contact dataset, right? So but I also my control is also dependent on account type. So account type can go here and email address would go here. And I'm saying that account type is also required. So user should be mapping account type from the forms property, account forms property. But when they're and in the dataset configuration, they should supply email address one as well. Email address one should be coming from the
in the
contact.
column.
So
Okay, in
it
the
might
column.
not be on the column, but it should be configured on the control. So that's how PCF can. So even if it is not on the column, it can get the value of the data from this property. So we are gonna look at
Okay,
this.
so okay, perfect. So I think it's more like, the context should have this field available at least. That's the whole idea, right? Okay.
Right. Yes.
Okay. Okay.
So
And if you don't have that account type on the form, what happens then? Let's suppose you
well,
said like,
it has to be. So if you're using property, then whatever we discussed in the field type controls, it would apply the same things here as well. So it should be on the form.
And if it doesn't, then the control would
Then
not render.
it would render. It would just not get the value. It would get null
Okay.
value. So if you're handling nulls, then your control might
Then
work.
it's fine. Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Makes sense. Okay.
Okay. So I'm going to keep this. And because we changed the control manifest file, first thing that we're going to do is going to go and build my a solution on my project.
Danish, I have a question here. Do we need to add dataset property for the columns which we need to modify only, or for the columns from which we need to get the data?
So as I said, like if you're writing a control where you necessarily need one single column data, like say datasets property in the sense is I need, when my control is loading, I need email address. Okay, email address is like a required thing when my control is going to load. So you will have to then define the property set. But if you have a data set which is generic, doesn't matter what, you're not dependent on any column, don't include this. This is optional. If you don't include this, then you will get all the data, all the columns data. If you include this, you will get that one single property sets data.
Okay.
Okay. So here I can have multiple property sets included. It all depends on how you're writing your control. So for example, let me show you the control that I had created, right? So in this case, it doesn't matter to me what my columns are. Users can have 100 columns over here. Doesn't matter. I would show all the columns data, whatever user has configured. My control is not dependent on particular column, but my control is dependent on which column should show this hover card, right? That does not necessarily have, like, I don't need that. I haven't defined that it needs to be description or it needs to be job title. It can be any column. So what I did is when I created the control, let me show you the index, the manifest file for that one. So in here, if you see, I have the data set which does not have property set in it, but I have a property tag which is taking a comma separated list of column names. That's how I configured it. It's all up to how you build your control. Okay, because I don't need a specific column in my data set. It could be any column.
Okay.
Okay, so so here is we are going to keep this for now. Okay, so now there are a few things that you could do in your data set as well. Okay, so let's go and see it succeeded or not. Okay, so it succeeded. Build is succeeded. Now let's go in our index file and start writing the code. Okay. So first thing is we would need is a container, a div tag. So let's go back to that control. Do I have it open? maybe not. I closed it. Let me run this again. So what I'm trying to build is list of labels, like table, right? One row would have one column data, other row would have other column, right? So I'm going to build a container, a div tag, and then inside the div tag I will be adding labels. That's what I'm going to do. I just want to run the UI so that I can walk you through the UI. This is super slow today. Starting control harness, come on, load. Okay. So here, if you see, the entire thing is my div tag. And inside the div tag, I have this one label, two label, and three labels, depending on how much data I'm getting in my dataset file. And then my type attribute is defining which columns data I need to show here. Okay, that's how I am defining my dataset control. So going back here, first thing is we would define our HTML elements. And one first HTML element would be our div container. So my div. And the second one would be my label. Label element. Okay. Now, once I define my HTML elements, I'm going to go in my init method. And in my init method, I'm going to initialize my, well, I don't need to do anything in the init method. So in this init method, I'm not initializing anything in on my UI, but I'm initializing my view or my UI on update view. The reason why I'm doing that is because I don't want my control to only load once. I want it to load every time there's a change in the property, or to update itself anytime there's a change in the property. Okay. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to get my data set. Okay. First thing is to get the value from the data set. So data set is equal to context dot. Now here is where I'm going to supply my parameter. And again, parameters dot. Now here I will get two things, right? First is my data set, and second is my main property. So as I said, this is my main property, and this is my data set. I don't get this property set as part of the parameter. Okay. So if you see here, parameters dot, I only get two things. Okay. In here, I want to get my data set first. Okay. So I retrieve my data set. Then second thing I'm going to do is I'm going to retrieve my column name. Okay. So context dot parameters dot main property is my column name. Okay. Now once I retrieved my data set and my column name, now I want to retrieve my my columns from the data set. So you can retrieve the columns from the data set if you have not specified this. Okay. If you have not specified this, then you will get all the columns from the data set that are available in the Excel spreadsheet or in the CSV file. So let's say CSV file has 10 columns. If you don't specify this particular property, then in the data set, when you do data set dot columns, you would get all the 10 columns. Okay. But when you define a property over here, you would only get one single column. So if you do columns dot the columns and then do a array square brackets, you can actually give the name that you have specified in the inner dataset property set. Okay, but in our example, we are not relying on the column, so it won't make sense to put this right here. We're going to use it. We'll use this later on to show you the difference. For now, I'm not going to use it. I'm gonna get my columns in here. So let data set columns to columns. Okay, so I got my columns. Okay, now how to retrieve the items from the data set? I got my columns, I got my data set, but how do I retrieve my items? To retrieve the items, what you have to do is there are two ways. Okay, so you have to do data set dot get selected record IDs is one, and records is another. Records would retrieve the records, but from sorted sorted record IDs. Okay, so record IDs and get selected record ID. Okay, so these are all the functions for the data set. How I like to perform my record fetching is using sorted record IDs. Okay, sorted record IDs dot, and then because sorted record IDs is an array, right? So you can either do for loop, for each, or you can use some of the TypeScript features like map. And then map, and then you have to write the give the anonymous function. So I'm going to give an anonymous function here and say, okay, so my function is going to be the key. So now inside that sorted IDs, this key would give me the record IDs array. Okay, so my record is going to be dataset dot records of that key. Any questions so far? I know there would be questions. How do you get this? Yeah.
Map is fine. I think I do have a question about the dataset.columns, right? This one. So if you have already main prop that you have used, right? So why exactly you're getting columns?
So,
or it's just a name, right?
So this is giving you, so in dataset, you have multiple columns and you have multiple rows. So record is giving you the first row. Record is not giving you a column value, a specific column value, right? So for example, if you take example of the CSV file that I had, let me open that up quickly. It's still opening. Everything is slow today. Okay, there we go. And we bring it here. Okay, so as you can see, you have two columns, but you have three rows. When you, so comparing it with the data, comparing it with this, when you do this sorted record IDs, and then you do this get dataset dot records of a key, right? Key is the primary key, and then based on that key, you're getting this records, right? It is only retrieving this row. It is, and it's going in the loop, right? So you have Danish, and then you have test. It's one row, but you need specific column value as well to show, right? That we are not doing here. We will use columns, dataset columns, to retrieve the column value.
So it's more like we'll compare the value and then we'll do it.
Right. Yes.
Okay, so that's why that's what my point was. Yeah, so you still get all the rows, you still get all the columns. Now the column that you need, then you have to work on that pretty much.
Right. Yes. Okay. So as I said, like this is the row record, so I can put it row instead of record. So let's say this is a row. Now from that row, we want to get the column values. Okay. Now to get the column values, I'll have to do a for loop again. Come on. Call in off and data set columns. Okay. And that's my for loop. And in this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to retrieve my record value. So this row dot get. So these are the things that you get as part of the row. So you can get the formatted value, you can get the named reference, you can get the record ID, or you can get the value. Okay. I like to use value, so I'm going to go with value. Okay. Oh, I have to give the column name. Here is where I have to give the column name of what column I need the value. So call dot name. Okay. But just retrieving the column name here won't just suffice in my case, because I want to create an array record which will be assigned to my div tag, right? So I have to create that array record first. So let me go and create that. So I'm going to call it as records. Well, yet records. Okay, so it's going to be called records, and inside that records, I will have new records added. So we'll have created where new record. So this is my one single row record that I want to create. And then it would have key. One would be key, and key would be, again, it would come from this row. So row dot get record ID. Okay, so I have key, and then I will have the other one would be the column itself, right? So I would have column new record, then my call dot name. So what I've done here is I've created a new row, let's say new row or modified row. Let's call it as modified my row. Okay, so what I did is I took the existing row that was supplied to me by the data set, and I've created my own custom row element, row object, and then I've assigned a key to it, and then I'm adding all the columns that are retrieved from the CSV file or from the data set itself as a column. So I'm keeping the same column name that I'm getting from the dataset columns. Okay. Following till here. So my row is my object that I've created. Now I want to add this row into my so my record, and this would get return as my row. Right. So this sorted record ID would then return array of my row, right? And then this array would be my records. Okay, so record would have it is showing over here. It would have keys a string, and then it would have array of column names. So that's how my records would be. Now, once my record is created, now I want to loop through those records and then start creating my UI. So here is where I just got the column names and got the record names. Okay. Sorry, got the dataset column names and got the items from the dataset. I've not started to create any UI in this view, right? So here is where I will start creating my UI. So when I'm creating my UI, how I want is I want to loop through all the records that are available in the dataset, right? So for that, records dot forage record, and here is where again you'd write your function, and this function would be forage, and inside forage, first thing is I need to create my div tag, right? So let's create my div tag over here. So my div tag dot is equal to document dot create element and div tag. So my div tag is ready. Now I need to create what I'm going to do is I'm going to create labels, right? Each time I'm going to create labels. This is why I've created a HTML element for label. So each for each would create a label for me. So my label is equal to document dot create element of type label, and then my label would have inner HTML is equal to in the records rec would be one single row, right? Records is all rows, rec is one single row. From that rec, I need my so whatever column name we have here, I want to show that column name's value on this inner HTML. Okay. Why is this throwing me an error? Column name my row of any, and then
I think because the column name, you are not getting the value, you are getting the main object of the property.
oh yes, you're right, you're right. Thank you. Yep, perfect. Okay, so I got that. Now my label, I need to add my label to my div tag, right? So same thing what we did before. My div dot append child and my label, and at the end we need to add my div into the container itself. So the container is, there's no container in the update view. Container is always, as I said, is always available only in the init method. So what we do is we create a global variable for PCF. And we call it as private, and then I just copy everything from here as I've done it in previous sessions as well, and just append the in front of it. So that becomes my container element, and container element gets defined over here. So the container is equal to container. Now I would be able to use the container outside of the init method in here. The container dot append child, and it would be my div. Okay, so that's it. So what we so let's go and review the code again. So what we did here is we took the data set from the parameters list. Then we took the column name from the property that we have defined. Then we identified what all columns are available in the data set, and then looped through the records. And from the record, we defined our own row object, and then added the dataset column, dataset value from the column into my row, and then I returned my row, which became my records. And then I started building my UI. So for the UI, I first initialized my div tag. Then I looped through all the records that were fetched from the above method. And then for each record, I'm creating a label. I'm then assigning the value inside that label to the value of that record for that particular column. And then I'm just appending it to my div tag, and then adding that div tag to my child. There's one thing. So div should be inside because otherwise label won't show up. And even this should also be inside. So we want to add div label. Otherwise label doesn't show up if it doesn't have div in it. That's just the HTML thing. Okay, so now once we have this, let's go and test it out. Hopefully we won't get any errors. Let's see. Any questions in the meantime while it's building? Okay, so it got succeeded. It's starting to run, and let's see. So it shows up here. The main property shows up here. The my dataset file shows up here. Let's go and select the my dataset file, test file. So as soon as you select it, it will give you the column name. This is the column name from the CSV file. You just have to confirm what is the type of that column. Okay, you can change the type from here, and then I say apply. Now it just added here. It's showing undefined because because there are two columns, name and session, but the property value is called val. So we're gonna put it as name, and there you go. So it started showing the name here, but as you can see, it was the code that we have written is in the update view, and the update view is invoked every time the property changes. So if I go and type anything over here, 3 rows will be added because there are three rows in the dataset file, right? So every time I do anything, it would keep on adding columns. So to compensate that, what I can do is I can actually every time the update view invokes, I can go and remove all the child elements from my parent container. So in the code, let me just close this out. And in the code here, what I can do is before I start going through all these things, first thing I can do is I can get all the child elements. And child elements of the container of this parent container of PCF's container. So that is the container dot last element. And I can do a while loop. In the while loop, I can do child element. Actually, should be singular. And I can just keep on removing the child from the container. So the container remove remove child, and this would be child element. And every time I do that, I would just again go and check whether whether there are any childs or not. So same thing that I did here, I would do it here as well. Okay, so if I do this, what it would do is it would remove all the child elements, then go and get the data, go through all the process, and then recreate the UI. So that because there are no child elements left in the container, I can keep on adding the child elements as much as I want. Okay. Still initializing, I believe. Just to speed up the process, I can do it from here as well. Why don't I get npm scripts? Let's go and test it. And let's go and select our file again. Okay. And then let's say apply. And then there is nothing over here because it's not matching any of the column name. And as you can see, it's refreshing, it's removing all the child and then adding new child elements. That's how it is working. We do it for session, then it would change the column. Okay. Any questions? Let me go back to the code. That's it. That's what I wanted to show today. Any questions?
Danish, quick question actually.
Yeah.
So the value in the PCF, and when we run the PCF, the value text box, it's actually the column name of the property set that we are using.
Yeah. So here as you can see, because I only wanted to show one single column.
And I get that, but in the manifest file, so I think that's the column that we are passing into the manifest file, right? That's the property set value.
Right. Yes. This is the main prop is the name of the column. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Sorry, I wasn't clear with the name because initially I added that name, but I wanted to differentiate between the property set and the property, so I renamed it again. So it wasn't clear enough. Sorry about that. Okay, so let me just quickly show how to use the property set. Okay, so property set, if we do that, so let me just save this, and because we are running under watch, every time you do any changes, it would reevaluate and rebuild itself. So we don't have to worry about that. But what happens is when you do that, and if you now go to our control, select the file, and now you see how the property that shows up here, it's called inner ds prop set. This is the property that we have defined in the manifest file. Inner ds property set, right? And then what it is telling is you should configure this inner property set to a column, and this column would give you all the columns from your data set. Okay, so if I select name and I say apply, nothing would show up here, even if my property here is session and name doesn't matter. Nothing happens. The reason is, if you look into the code, so let me just inspect this. I'm going to show you what happens in the code behind. So in the code behind, if you go and look at the record columns that we are retrieving, let's look at this. Okay, so I'm going to just the code is invoked. So every time you hit apply, the code gets invoked. But in the records, you can see that I'm getting three rows, but the name is the name of the property set, not of the column. Okay, it's always getting inner data set, the inner DS property set. That's what I'm getting in my code, right? It's not no longer referring to the records. So the records has two columns. One is key and the other one is inner data set property set. That's the difference. So if you're giving property set, then property set would have only those properties that you're defining on your manifest file. Did you get the difference? So it would, so if I have three properties here, then in my code I would only get these three properties, three column data. I won't get anything else because my control is only looking for these three columns. It's not looking for anything else. So it's not generic anymore. It is only dependent on these three columns. So you're just telling the control that I don't care about all the other columns. I only care about these three columns because my code only uses this three column. So I can have like email address.
Okay, Danish, I got your point, but what is the is there any other benefit except limiting the number of columns?
Yes, so there is. So let's say on the contact, so let's take an example about accounts and contacts, right? On the contact, you're using a subgrid, but that subgrid does not have a subgrid. There is no column for email address, but your control requires email address. So when you're configuring this in on model driven app, you can look for any other like all the columns are available for you for that particular data set. For in this example, even if email address is not available on the column, you can still add email address on the configuration.
Okay, so that email address will be from the entity of the grid.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, even if the column is not available on the grid itself, you can still pass in some of the attributes from that entity to your data set.
Okay.
Danish, quick question related to the question that just been asked.
Yep.
So if you don't provide the the specific field, right? Let's say with the property set. So I understand the property set is not necessarily need to be in the view of the column. The column, it needs to be the part of the view, obviously. But the question is, if you don't provide these, and then you only get the view columns, you don't get the whole entity columns. Like you don't get the whole entity fields, right? You just
Right.
get what exactly in the view.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
And can we look at the index.tsl for a minute, please?
Yeah, sure. So here I've provided a very simple example, but dataset can get little tricky. And the main thing with the working with dataset is recreating the UI. So if you're going to recreate your grid in something that you can achieve using using just HTML elements, then go for it. But most of the time, what I've seen is people rather prefer using React and Office UI Fabric elements to go through the records and then recreate them using React.
Okay. That's actually a different as well. Like, if you go start extending into React, I'm just keen to see the changes that you need to do in terms of it's not that like you actually go and include the component and stuff directly and start using it. You need to do something before that, right?
Right. I mean, not too much. It's like how you normally use a React, but there are certain things that I would like to highlight while when you are using React. As I said, I like to use MVVM methodology. So those are the things that you should be looking out for. What I've seen people do is they pass the entire context to React and then write the entire logic in React. And context is passed as a property. Like I'm not against it, but I would say that it's too much for React to handle. React should only take in the properties that it really needs. And all the other logic that you want to build should always be in the index file.
Okay.
Any other questions?
I'm having some error in building up the the PCF. Not exactly
What's
sure.
the error?
Yeah, I'm getting something like a string can't be used to index type. No index signature was a parameter of a type string was found on type. It's a weird one.
Okay, so if there are no other questions, Jay, I know you have errors. We'll look into that. But are there any other questions before we look into Jay's issue? All right, I think so. Then let me just stop the presentation. And you want to share your